let's go to Skype and bring in Neil Greenberg. He is a sports writer and a statistician for the Washington Post. And we're going to talk a little bit LeBron James versus Michael Jordan. Neil, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So, Neil, we're all talking about it. I mean, it is being talked about on Twitter, on Facebook, on talk shows, on television,
Instagram, Vine,
all over the place. But in an article that you recently wrote for the Washington Post, you make the case that what LeBron James is doing right now, and what he did in 2007, is greater than anything Michael Jordan did in any of his 6 championship seasons. Expound on that a little bit, will you?
Well, what we're seeing right now is just an absolutely dominating performance and almost a one-man show in the NBA Finals on Cleveland's side in what LeBron James is doing. And he's had to do it because he's lost Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving to injury. So he is, quite frankly, single-handedly carrying this team in the finals and is doing better with less than anything that Michael Jordan had to do during any of his NBA final runs. So if LeBron James is able to win a championship, it will be one of the most heroic performances we've ever seen in NBA history.
Well, I would, Neil, this is Woody, and I do a lot with less. I have less here. I have nothing almost that I can deal with here, but I would totally agree with you, but I personally don't think, and prove me wrong, that in any way diminishes what Michael Jordan accomplished. We've got a guy that could be now 3-3 in NBA Finals against a guy that was 6-0 in NBA Finals, who worked with a cast of characters, except for a couple, that Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman.
Well, keep in
he had
mind,
a lot of people that weren't that good.
Neil broke it down statistically, analytically.
That's why I'm asking.
So that's the angle we're taking here.
Yeah.
Sure. And it's not to diminish anything that Michael Jordan did, but if there's a player that LeBron James is most compared to, it's Michael Jordan. And when you look at how they've done in the first 12 years, in the first 12 years of their career and what they've accomplished to date, I mean, LeBron James has been every bit as good as Michael Jordan in the playoffs, but the difference does come down to the supporting cast. I mean, Michael Jordan had Scottie Pippen, like you said, Horace Grant, Dennis Rodman for a time. I mean, those are top 50 players, and when LeBron James has had a player that caliber in Dwayne Wade, he's won championships, but most of the time he hasn't. And as I said, the individual performances, pretty close to being identical, supporting cast, completely different, and that's what's been the difference for Michael Jordan.
Yeah, Neil, I think people tend to forget that Michael Jordan, as great as he was, still had Scottie Pippen, one of the top 50 players of all time. He had Horace Grant, who was an all-star. He had Dennis Rodman for the last 3, and Rodman is also a Hall of Famer. But LeBron, outside of Miami, really hasn't had those guys next to him. What LeBron did in 2007, and what LeBron is doing now in Cleveland, getting these teams to the NBA Finals and having a chance to win, is that, in your mind, near miraculous?
It certainly is, and it's something that we haven't seen. I mean, we've seen Shaquille O'Neal have dominant performances. We've seen Barkley have dominant playoff performance. We've certainly seen Michael Jordan have them. But again, I mean, the supporting cast in Cleveland's case in this particular finals is hands down inferior to anything that we've seen before. And, you look at some of the players that have stepped up, like, Dellavedova and Shumpert. I mean, those are quality role players, but they're not going to be on anybody's top NBA player list. But again, I mean, Michael Jordan had those type of players. And what we're seeing right now from LeBron is, quite frankly, miraculous.
Sure, but you're both of you are giving me opinions, and he said you broke it down analytically. Can you get to something specific? Forgive me, but let's get to something specific.
You're being challenged here,
Neil. That proves that he's having a better series than. I mean, there were times Larry Bird had 29 points. He had 21 rebounds. He had 18 assists in a game. Magic Johnson, and then we've seen incredible performances. So tell me why this one is so much better than what I've seen doing this for 40 years.
Sure. So there's one of these catch-all metrics out there created by Jim Hollinger called Game Score, and what that does is it looks to bring in all the box score stats that we're familiar with: points, rebounds, assists, etc., and kind of give you one encompassing number for that particular performance. So far in the finals, LeBron James has a game score of 27.2, and it's on the same scale as you would think of points. So the higher is better. A 40 game score is obviously elite. So he's been averaging 27.2. Jordan during his final runs was 23.2. So that's actually a pretty significant difference in terms of overall performance. And then you have Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant, both who were in the high 14s, high 15s, whereas LeBron only has Timothy Mozgov, who's close to 13. So the drop-off from LeBron to his supporting cast, the difference is not only greater, but he's also performing better than we've seen Michael Jordan perform in the finals when you make an apples to apples comparison.
So can I ask, you said it's stuff in the box score. When Bob Ryan and I, and I'm sure you're familiar with him, Bob Ryan and I were young NBA and ABA writers and wrote columns for the Sporting News, we both put together, and Bob's actually has been paid attention to. He developed an overall rating, and I did too for Sporting News. And I'm curious now if you could just give people who are watching this show an idea of, when you say the box score stuff, are we taking every line of the box score and putting a value on that? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, that's correct. So what you're doing is you're adjusting the scores in terms of historical performance, so it's easier to compare one era to the next. And you're looking at points, assists, rebounds, turnovers, steals, but then looking at what you would expect from an average player getting that type of minutes to the player in question. And by using that, it's much easier to compare a player like Michael Jordan, who's no longer active in the league but played in the 90s, versus LeBron, who's playing today. So when you do that, it's clear that LeBron has been more successful in the finals from an individual perspective. Yeah. But again, the supporting cast around him is inferior.
Okay, just to follow up on that, if I can, this will make more sense to me, because I'm trying to learn. I'm not really trying to be argumentative so much here. That
I understand.
There's a 4-point difference. All right, have you guys done, say, Tim Duncan, that wouldn't be a small sampling. I'd like to see what Tim Duncan's number is in comparison to, given his number of championships, in comparison to what Michael Jordan did, and also to LeBron, because that would give me more of a value point kind of situation.
Sure. I believe it's on average anywhere between 23 and 25. So on par with Jordan, probably slightly inferior to LeBron. But again, Tim Duncan has a pretty strong supporting cast in his own right. And matter of fact, I mean, it's been a while since he's been the best player on his own team in terms of production. But is this the end of the debate? No, of course not. But it does give you a way to compare, especially players from different eras who play with different teammates, to see how much of the workload they are assuming.
All right, Neil, let me do a reverse translation here. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. Let's talk conventional box score numbers now. What do you believe LeBron James needs to accomplish? What numbers, points, rebounds, assists, etc., in order for Cleveland to actually win this finals?
Well, it's got to be pretty close to a triple-double. I mean, he needs to be in excess of 27 points, have about 7 rebounds, 8 assists, almost 2 steals, and and take at least 6 free throws a game. So we're coming close to, and that's just to give them a break-even chance of winning. Historically, when a player has had that type of performance, when I'm reverse engineering a game score to box score, that's what we're looking at, almost close to a triple-double, and that's pretty close to what LeBron's been doing in the playoffs.
Well, Neil, a lot of people will say that the biggest number needs to be assists, because it means he's getting his teammates involved and they're actually scoring off of his passes. Would you agree with that?
Sure, I would, but the downside is, and we've seen this before, right? A player can make a great pass, but then the shot can be blown, and then that player does not get credit. So I mean, assists are definitely part of it. I like to more look at usage. The NBA now tracks the usage of a player in terms of how many of the possessions that player is using. So ever since Kyrie Irving has gone down, LeBron James is involved in almost half of the possessions
Wow.
on the court. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So even if his assist total isn't reflecting that, he's certainly being used way more. And to kind of put it in perspective in terms of playoffs, LeBron James is typically used about 32% of the time in the playoffs. Michael Jordan was close to 35%, so slightly more. But as I said, once LeBron has lost the two of his big three, then his usage has gone through.
The other analytical aspect I would ask you, it seemed to me, and maybe I didn't look at the final number, but in overtime, LeBron's number was 11 for 33.
Sure.
To me, that's 22 wasted opportunities almost that they're not getting anything out of it. I mean, is that figure into your analytical and the one you're using where if
bad usage.
if a guy is if a guy is shooting 27%, but also he's probably shooting 10% on his outside shots because he's making the ones that where he goes to the basket. That's got to figure into that somewhere because that is miserable stuff that throughout the playoffs, his outside shot has been awful.
Yeah, and I actually wrote about this earlier in the postseason as being one of the keys for the Warriors to almost dare him to shoot because he hasn't been shooting very well, but he can drive to the basket. He can work off of isolations. He can get to the free throw line. So there's a lot of other things that he can do. Now, in terms of, do you want LeBron James to take 30 shots and take your chances, or would you rather someone else on the team who isn't as good take those shots? I think we'd probably want LeBron James as a coach to take those shots, but I agree with you. I mean, his performance overall, aesthetically, has not been good. But the production from a bottom line aspect has been really good, and that's what's kept them in the series so far.
Great stuff,
I
Neil.
think he needs to take a few less fall away jumpers where he's falling to the left, and he's about 35 feet from the basket. Neil, thanks a lot. That was very interesting. Neil Greenberg of the Washington Post. Neil, where can they find you on Twitter?
N Greenberg on Twitter. And Grenberg.
Any other place we can find you? Would you give us your home address? We'd like.
Where do you like to hang out? Restaurants? Anything?
I'm in the DC. I'm in my mom's basement in the DC area. I'm easy to find.
You're a blogger. Okay. Thanks, Neil. We'll talk to you soon. Neil Greenberg.
Thank you.
All right. This portion of the big stuff brought to you by Grand Prix Motorsports, your source for the original motorcycle, Indian motorcycles. So check out the newest line of Indian motorcycles at Grand Prix Motorsports on County Line and Santa Fe. And there is lovely Shannon on one of her Indian motorcycles, enjoying the ride. You see by her big smile.